So today what we're going to be working on is simplifying cube roots. Alright, so I'd like you to try this, which is define a perfect cube. So think about what a perfect square is. Okay, and the definition of a perfect cube is very similar, but think of what cube means. And then come back and check your answers. So the definition of a perfect cube is the product So remember, product means the answer to a multiplication problem. It's the product of a number multiplied three times. All right, so we're going to make a list. All right, so we're going to start on the left here, and we're going to make a list of perfect cubes, and then there are negative perfect cubes. So over here, and we're just working with numbers today. So remember, it's the product of a number multiplied three times. So we're going to start with 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. 6 times 6 times 6 is 216. 7 times 7 times 7 is 343. And we'll do one more. 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. Alright, so now let's write down what the cube roots are. So the cube root, now when you write a cube root, there is a 3 inside the check mark. So it's a tiny 3. It's not a very large 3 because you don't want it to look too large that it looks like 3 times. So it's a little 3 inside the check mark. So the cube root of 1 is 1, right? It's saying what multiplied 3 times gives me 1. The cube root of 8 is 2. The cube root of 27 is 3. The cube root of 64 is 4. The cube root of 125 is 5. The cube root of 216 is 6. The cube root of 343 is 7. That's a 4 in there. And the cube root of 512 is 8. And obviously this list goes on and on and on. It's an infinite list. Okay, so I would know those first 8. Okay, you should know them off the top of your head. Okay, any other ones you could always sit there and make a list. All right, let's talk about the negatives. Okay, so the reason why there could be negatives is because we have negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. And then we have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 is negative 8. Negative 3, so you'll see a pattern, times negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 27. Negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4 is negative 64. Negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 is negative 125. Negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6 is negative 216. So you could see that the perfect cubes with negatives, these are the same numbers as the numbers that are over here, but they're just negative. So then the next one would be negative 343. And then the next one after that would be negative 512. Okay, so let's now put the cube roots down. The cube root of negative 1 is negative 1. The cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. The cube root of negative 27 is negative 3. The cube root of negative 64 is negative 4. The cube root of negative 125 is negative 5. The cube root of negative 216, that's a negative in there, is negative 6. The cube root of negative 343 would be negative 7. The cube root of negative 512 would be negative 5, and so on. Okay, so perfect cubes, you can have a negative under there. Just make sure that your answer is going to be negative also. Okay, so now let's start simplifying cube roots. Sorry, and on my paper, I have here square roots. This is cube roots. Your paper does say cube roots, but mine, I forgot to change it to say square roots. Okay, so let's look at, and this is the same exact thing as simplifying square roots, except you're going to be using cube roots. Okay, perfect cubes. All right, so find, here we go. Find the largest perfect cube that divides into the radicand evenly. Remember, the radicand is the number that's under the radical. Make a factor tree. Take the cube root of the perfect cube. Keep the radical, right? Make sure the cube root is, since we're dealing with cube roots, is a cube root, and that there is a little 3 in the index. And keep the radicand. And one other thing is this, when the radicand is negative, your negative would go with the perfect cube. So I'll show you what that means in a minute. Okay? All right, so what perfect cube, so we have the cube root of 16. So we want to find what perfect cube divides into 16 evenly. All right, so look how I'm writing this. The cube root of a number times the cube root of a number. So what perfect cube? Look at the list. Hopefully you found 8. So it's 8 times 2 is 16. And they're both under the cube roots. Now we're going to take the cube root of 8. The cube root of 8 is 2. And then I bring this down, the cube root of 2. Notice I have that little 3 in the check mark. Okay? All right, let's take a look at number 2. What perfect cube divides into negative 108? And notice I have this 2 on the outside, so I'm just going to bring that down and then multiply that coefficient by the other coefficient I get. Notice there is a negative, so the negative will go under the perfect cube. So find a perfect cube that divides into 108. Look at the list. Bring down the 2. Hopefully you all found 27. It's 27 times 4. But, let me just erase that. It is negative 108, so it has to be negative 27. The cube root of negative 27. Keep bringing down that 2. The cube root of negative 27 is negative 3. And then we bring down the cube root of 4. Then we multiply these together. 2 times negative 3, that's negative 6. The cube root of 4. All right, let's try number 3. So again, I have a coefficient on the outside, so I'm going to bring that coefficient down. 10. Find a perfect cube that goes into 320. So look at your list, use your calculator. So that is 64. 64 times 5 is 320. Bring down the 10. The cube root of 64 is 4. Bring down the cube root of 5. And then 10 times 4 is 40. And then we have the cube root of 5. All right, number 4. So I see my coefficient is a fraction, but that's okay. So I'm going to bring down the negative 3/5. I notice that there is a negative under the cube root, so I'm going to put my negative under where I'm going to put my perfect cube, sorry. So what perfect cube, look at the list, goes into 250? That is 125, so it's going to be negative 125 is my perfect cube times 2. So bring down negative 3/5. The cube root of negative 125 is negative 5. And then bring down the cube root of 2. Then we multiply these together. Negative 3/5 times negative 5 is positive 3. The cube root of 2. Okay, so that's it, and we'll practice some more tomorrow. Everybody have a good night.